According to this report, her suspected killers planned it all out before dumping her body in a rocky desert area of Henderson. Marayana Rodgers was last seen at around 1 a.m. on December 6th after meeting up with her suspected killers, 19-year-old Sakari Harnden and former G League basketball player Chance Comanche.
An NBA player being a murderer. This isn't something you would expect, right? Well, in today's case, we're talking about a 23-year-old girl called Marayana Rodgers, who suffered one of the most gruesome, gory murders by the hands of a well-known basketball player. The story doesn't stop there, though. Not only was Marayana murdered, but her killing was an organized crime. Get ready, because this case is truly disturbing and will stay with you long after watching.
The report identifies Rodgers as a prostitute who was friends with fellow sex worker Harnden. Investigators say Harnden and Comanche were worried about knowledge Rodgers had on a previous crime involving a boyfriend of Harnden. The report says Sakari was upset at Marayana for telling other people. Also, according to the report, Comanche told police he and Harnden came up with a plan to lure Rodgers back to their car for sex. And a text thread from November 30th to December 6th shows the former couple joking about ways they would kill her, like an overdose or using a gun. Investigators say Comanche confessed to police.
It was a cold, dark December night in the Nevada desert, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like something bad is about to happen. And for Marayana Rodgers, something unimaginably horrific was about to unfold. Lured into the car by two people she thought she could trust, the 23-year-old's life was about to be torn away in a brutal act of violence that was as senseless as it was sickening. By the time her body was discovered, decomposing under the scorching sun just outside Henderson, Nevada, the truth that emerged was so twisted, so depraved, that it would forever haunt the investigators who worked the case. But before we delve into the grisly details of her murder, we need to rewind. We need to understand who Marayana was and how she ended up in the crosshairs of these killers.
Tonight, we are learning possible motives in the murder of a Linwood woman whose body was found in a Nevada desert last week.
New court documents say just days before that murder, there was an argument between the victim and one of the suspects, having to do with why the suspect's boyfriend is now in jail, accused in a separate double murder case in California. King 5's Brady Wakayama has the latest.
Video of 27-year-old Chance Comanche in a Sacramento courtroom Tuesday afternoon.
Born in Linwood, California, Marayana Rodgers had grown up in the kind of environment that breaks you down long before you ever get a chance to rise up. Her neighborhood was one of those places you see in news reports, violent, poor, and forgotten by the politicians who only remember it when election season rolls around. But for Marayana, this was home. Raised by a single mother, Marayana had always been fighting to survive. It wasn't just the poverty, though that was always there, hovering like a dark cloud. It was the racial inequities that stacked the odds against her from day one. As a young black girl, she was taught early on that the world wasn't going to hand her anything. Her skin color made her a target, her gender made her vulnerable, and the combination of both made her nearly invisible to those who were supposed to protect her. Marayana's dreams were like any young woman's. She wanted to get out, go back to school, make something of herself. But the harsh realities of life had other plans. By the time she was in her 20s, she had relocated to Las Vegas, trying to escape the suffocating limits of her upbringing. Las Vegas, glitzy, glamorous on the surface, but if you scratched beneath the glittering lights, the city was rotten to the core. For someone like Marayana, Vegas wasn't a ticket to fame and fortune. It was another trap, just with a different backdrop. The allure of easy money and quick fixes pulled her into the world of sex work, where danger lurked around every corner. This wasn't a glamorous choice, it was a desperate one. For black women in America, survival often means making choices that no one should have to make. This is a system that leaves women like Marayana with their backs against the wall, forced to fend for themselves in a society that would sooner discard them than offer a helping hand. Sex work is dangerous for anyone, but for black women like Marayana, the risks are worse. They are unfairly targeted for violence, and when that violence happens, it's often ignored. The police don't take it seriously. The media doesn't take it seriously. effortlessly. And so, when someone like Marayana goes missing, it barely makes a ripple. Their lives are seen as disposable. This is the reality of racism, and it played a direct role in what happened to her.
Investigators obtained this criminal complaint, which states on December 6th, Harnden held or detained Rodgers against her will for the purpose of killing her or inflicting substantial bodily harm. Friends say they believe Rodgers had gotten into a car with Harnden the night of her disappearance. So far, no confirmation from police. Harnden also faces a theft charge after police say she stole a Rolex. Rodgers' family and friends are trying to get the word out about her disappearance on social media. They say she had a good job as a medical assistant, would never leave her family back home in Washington, or abandon her dogs, which she brought with her to Las Vegas. They believe the circumstances of her disappearance are no doubt suspicious.
Marayana wasn't new to danger. She had seen it all around her, growing up in Linwood. But what makes her story even more tragic is that the danger this time came from people she thought she knew. Enter Sakari Harden, a 19-year-old who, like Marayana, was caught up in the same world of sex work. Sakari was a teenager, barely out of high school, yet already hardened by a life that had shown her little kindness. Her life mirrored Marayana's in many ways. Two women navigating the dangerous underbelly of Las Vegas, doing what they had to in order to survive. Then there was Chance Comanche, a 27-year-old ex-G League basketball player who had once tasted the promise of something better, but had since fallen into the darkness of drugs, crime, and violence. What connected these three individuals was a fragile web of survival, a shared desperation, a shared struggle. But for Marayana, that connection would soon turn deadly. The tension between Marayana and Sakari started small, a stolen Rolex watch. In the grand scheme of things, it should have been insignificant, but in their world, where trust was rare and betrayal was constant, it spiraled into something much darker. Sakari was convinced that Marayana was out to get her, that this was more than just a petty theft. It was paranoia, but paranoia in their world wasn't without its reasons. Survival often meant thinking everyone was out to get you, but in this case, it was Sakari who would strike first.
A woman is missing, and now her friend is in jail.
We've been speaking with family members and friends all day as there is an effort to find her. Here's what we've learned.
This is Marayana Rodgers, a 23-year-old visiting Las Vegas with friends from the Seattle area.
In the days leading up to Marayana's murder, the conversations between Sakari and Chance took a horrifying turn. They began texting each other, not about how to resolve the situation, but about how to end it, how to end Marayana's life. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of violence. It was premeditated, cold, calculated, and planned out in chilling detail. They laughed as they plotted, exchanging messages about how they would kill her. Sakari asked Chance if they wanted Marayana chipped, meaning if they should have her killed, or if they should take her out themselves. The casualness of the conversation is what's most disturbing. These weren't hardened criminals talking. They were two young people, one barely out of her teens, discussing murder as if it were a simple task, as if Marayana's life was worth nothing more than a joke. To make matters worse, Chance entertained the discussion with ideas on how they should do it. An overdose, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Marayana wouldn't live to see another day. The messages paint a picture of two people so devoid of empathy, so removed from reality, that the act of murder became nothing more than an item on their to-do list. And this is where we see the insidious nature of how the criminal justice system often fails marginalized communities. Had these messages been intercepted earlier, had anyone taken the threat seriously, Marayana might still be alive. But the truth is, crimes against Black women, especially those involved in sex work, are rarely treated with the urgency they deserve.
Police say the two women had an argument over a Rolex watch, and that Rodgers had threatened her life over it. That's when records show the two defendants put together a ruse to lure Rodgers into their car. After that, they allegedly tied her up, strangled her with a cord, and choked her until she was unresponsive. Law enforcement alleged the two defendants dumped the body in the desert and smashed her phone.
December 6, 2023 was the night Marayana Rodgers' life would come to a gruesome end. Lured into a car by Sakari and Chance, she probably thought it was just another ride, another night trying to navigate the dangerous streets. She had no idea that the people in the car with her were planning to kill her. The moment she got into the car, everything changed. According to police reports, Marayana was immediately restrained, her hands bound with with zip ties, leaving her powerless to fight back. Panic must have set in fast, the terrifying realization that she wasn't getting out of this alive. What followed was nothing short of torture. An HDMI cord, something as mundane as what you use to connect your television, became the weapon that would take her life. Chance, with no hesitation, wrapped the cord around Marayana's neck and began to strangle her. Imagine the fear, the pain as Marayana struggled to breathe, as her body fought to survive against impossible odds. Every second would have felt like an eternity. As if the act of strangling her wasn't enough, Sakari joined in, holding Marayana down to ensure she couldn't escape, couldn't fight back. Together, they took her life in one of the most brutal, inhumane ways possible. Let that sink in for a moment. These weren't hardened criminals. These were two young people, barely into adulthood, capable of a level of violence that is difficult to comprehend. And the most chilling part? They didn't seem to care. They had no remorse, no second thoughts as they watched the life drain from Marayana's body.
I read through the entire police report tonight, and that included text messages sent between the two suspects talking about different ways to kill. 19-year-old Sakari Harnden and 27-year-old Chance Comanche have both been arrested, each facing an open murder charge in the death of 23-year-old Marayana Rodgers.
Once the murder was done, Marayana's killers treated her body like garbage. They didn't stop to reflect on the horror they had just committed. There was no pause, no guilt, no sense of human decency. Instead, they loaded her lifeless body into the car and drove out to the desert, a place so vast and desolate that it often becomes a final resting place for those society deems expendable. In their minds, Marayana was just another body, easily disposed of, easily forgotten. They dumped her there, under the unrelenting sun, where the heat would accelerate the decomposition process, and where predators would scavenge whatever they could. In the days following her death, her body lay abandoned, her skin blistering in the relentless Nevada heat. By the time she was discovered, her once vibrant, youthful face had been reduced to an unrecognizable state, her body so decomposed that identifying her would take time. Her killers hoped no one would ever find her. They were wrong. It was a group of hikers who stumbled upon her remains, the stench of death alerting them to something horribly out of place in the otherwise peaceful desert. They called the police, who arrived to find Marayana's body bloated and decayed, a grotesque display of the violence that had been done to her. The desert, with its scorching days and freezing nights, had ravaged her, erasing almost all traces of the young woman she had been. What was left was a grotesque shadow of a life brutally cut short.
Comanche suggested getting Rodgers drunk and mixing rat poison in her drink, or making her overdose on drugs, adding, "There's a lot of ways to kill people." Eventually, Harnden told Comanche to sit in the backseat of her car while they picked up Rodgers and pretend to be a trick, which is slang for a solicitor of female sex workers, which multiple people in the report said both Rodgers and Harnden were. Comanche talked about methods of killing, saying he could do it from the back seat, like how killers do it in the movies.
When the police began their investigation, it didn't take long to zero in on Sakari and Chance. Their digital trail was sloppy, to say the least. The text messages, the chilling conversations about how to kill Marayana, all of it was still on their phones. They hadn't even bothered to delete the evidence. It was almost as if they didn't believe they could get caught, or worse, they didn't care. When confronted, Sakari and Chance showed no remorse. They were emotionless, cold, and detached from the horror of what they had done. They didn't try to deny it. The evidence was overwhelming. What could they say? Instead, they recounted the events as if they were telling a mundane story. How they had strangled Marayana, how they had dumped her in the desert like she was nothing more than an object to be discarded. The case was a slam dunk for the prosecution. In court, the details of the murder left everyone sickened. The images of Marayana's body, the forensic evidence, the recorded conversations, it was all laid bare. The courtroom was filled with Marayana's family, friends, and community members who had loved her, all of them forced to relive her final moments, forced to see just how cruel her end had been.
People are in custody tonight. They are accused of plotting the kidnapping and the murder of a woman who was visiting Las Vegas.
One of the suspects was at one point friends with the victim. The other, an NBA G League basketball player just released from his team. 19-year-old Sakari Harnden and 27-year-old Chance Comanche are facing murder charges.
Here's the thing though, Marayana's murder wasn't just about two killers. This was about a system that had failed Marayana long before Sakari and Chance ever entered the picture. Marayana had been failed at every turn by the social services that didn't protect her, by the police who didn't take her life seriously, by a society that still sees black women, especially those involved in sex work, as less than human. Her death was the tragic result of racism and sexism, of a society that routinely turns a blind eye to the violence black women face. And while Sakari and Chance will face justice for what they did, there's a larger reckoning that needs to happen.
In a confession to police, Comanche said he was texting the victim, pretending to be a trick and wanting to meet up for sex. He said once in the car, Rodgers agreed to have her hands zip-tied. He says he used an HDMI cord to strangle her, and Harnden joined in and used her hands, strangling the victim together. They put her body in a ditch in the desert outside of Las Vegas, covering her remains with rocks.
Marayana's murder sent shockwaves through Las Vegas and across the country. It wasn't just the horrific nature of the crime that stood out, it's what her death represented. The ongoing issues black women face in America. The media barely covered her disappearance, the police didn't act until it was too late, and now her case has been overshadowed by other, more sensational crimes. Her story isn't just another true crime tale, it's a wake-up call. This isn't just about a young woman who was killed by people she trusted. It's about a broken system that let her slip through the cracks, a system that saw her as disposable long before she ever got into that car. Black women are facing violence at alarming rates. They're nearly 3 times more likely to be murdered by men than white women. They experience domestic violence at rates 35% higher than white women. In 2020, over 90,000 black women and girls were reported missing in the U.S., but their stories rarely get the spotlight. Marayana wasn't just a statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman with her own dreams. But in the end, she became just another black woman whose life was brutally cut short by people who didn't care about her humanity.
Chance confessed to the murder while behind bars, that he strangled Marayana with an HDMI cord while Sakari choked her. Then they buried her body in a ditch in the desert and used a towel to move rocks to not leave DNA behind. The report says in his jailhouse confession, Chance Comanche showed detectives where they buried her, and detectives found Marayana's remains.
Sakari and Chance got sentenced to life in prison without parole, but that doesn't bring Marayana back. Her family still has to live with the fact that she was tortured and killed by people she trusted. Her friends have to remember her not as the bright, hopeful person she was, but as a victim of one of the most senseless murders Vegas has ever seen. And here's the brutal truth. Marayana's story isn't unique. Black women are disproportionately targeted for violence in America, and when it happens, it often goes unnoticed, unreported, and unpunished. Homicide is the second leading cause of death for black women aged 20 to 44, and nearly 60% of those murders are by someone they know, a current or former partner. Marayana's murder was horrific, but what's worse is that she's just one of many. Marayana's case is truly terrifying, and it forces us to face a harsh reality. If it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. The real question is not if, but when will it happen again, and who will be next? So what are your thoughts on Marayana's case? Do you think her murderers received a harsh enough punishment? What should be done to stop these heinous crimes? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more content.